it isn't enough to just flim-flam somebody financially. Not on this scale. It isn't enough. You have to silence them when they quit, of course. That's part of it. But you also have to prevent them from as you just said, thinking critically. You have to keep them in. You have to make it difficult for them to quit. You have to separate them from reality, and you have to take away their critical thinking faculties. And that is exactly the definition of a cult.
That's Robert FitzPatrick talking about multi-level marketing schemes. And this is the All Things Risk podcast. Welcome back to the All Things Risk podcast. I'm Ben Catania, your host. This is the show in which we use the lenses of risk and uncertainty to understand ourselves and our world a little bit better. To tee up this episode, I'd like you to imagine a fantasy world in which there is endless abundance, a world in which risk and uncertainty don't exist, a world in which all you have to do is think positive thoughts, do exactly as you're told, and provided you do it, all your dreams will come true. Believe it or not, millions of grown adults believe or have believed in this fantasy world and have lost fortunes, friends, marriages, and in some cases, even their own lives as the fantasy world crumbles and reality sets in. Well, this is exactly what happens to many of the people who get involved in multi-level marketing schemes, otherwise known as MLMs, or their cousins known as gifting schemes. And yet, the purveyors of these fantasies are legal billion-dollar companies with recognizable names such as Amway, Herbalife, Nu Skin, Arbonne, and more. I'd like to introduce you to this episode's guest, Robert FitzPatrick. Robert is an expert in examining and revealing deception and fraud in bogus home-based businesses. He is a recognized authority in multi-level marketing schemes and pyramid scheme fraud. He has been featured in 60 Minutes, interviewed by Mike Wallace in the USA, on NBC Dateline, on ABC World News, on several BBC programs in the UK, the CBC in Canada, and more. Robert's latest book is called Ponzinomics, The Untold Story of Multi-Level Marketing. It describes how multi-level marketing was created in the USA, escaped criminal and civil prosecution, spread all over the world, and how it turned the legitimate business of direct selling into pyramid selling, and how business can become a delusional belief. We get into all of that in this episode. We discuss why only a small percentage of less than 1% of people involved in these schemes make any money on them. We talk about what you can do if you or someone you know is caught up in one, and so much more. This is a fascinating conversation. We definitely go long form here, so let's dive in. Here is Robert FitzPatrick on Ponzinomics. Robert, welcome to the All Things Risk podcast. It's a pleasure to have you on.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here.
So we're going to talk about multi-level marketing, and I think this is going to be absolutely fascinating. There's so much of it, and you're a world-renowned expert on it. Before we dive into that and your latest book, Ponzinomics, I would love for you to give my listeners a bit of background as to who you are and how you got into researching these types of organizations.
Well, first of all, there's no formal way to go into this subject academically, right? It just doesn't exist. It crosses so many disciplines. A pyramid scheme disguised as a sales company is not really business because there's no value exchanged and there's no voluntary contract deception rules throughout the whole process. So, and yet it is done in a commercial format. So there's an element of business. And I think that's fundamental to it. So my background at the time that I first encountered this world of pyramid schemes was in business, and in a particular area of business too, also a bit obscured. I worked as a trade association manager and later as a consultant in a particular area of distributor marketing. So this is between companies who sell their product through independent companies, independent distributors. Often the product is either too diverse, the customer base is too large for them to field their own sales force. So they use local independent distributors. I mean, billions and billions of dollars are transacted this way, but it's this political relationship between the supplier and the distributor is an area seldom discussed. But through happenstance, actually, I came into that world first as an editor of a small trade magazine that was addressed to distributors in one industry, and that led me into helping these distributors form a trade organization. And of course, the nuts and bolts of those groups and my work were things like sales contracts, marketing incentives, bonuses, territories, how to settle disputes, how many distributors is too many, saturation, and what role does the manufacturer play in marketing the product versus what role does the distributor play in marketing. So I was very conversant in the fundamentals of distribution. Then I had this personal encounter, completely apart from my world of business, recruited by friends. This was in the late 80s, to join in what was truly and clearly a pyramid scheme. But it wasn't, no pyramid scheme on earth, of course, is described itself as a pyramid scheme. Nobody says, here, come join this pyramid scheme. They're always disguised as something. And this one is now called gifting schemes. And they still are around all over the place. The gifting circles, gifting tables, they're called gifting schemes. And basically, it's nothing more than an endless chain pyramid scheme. It has a broad narrative, in this case, a kind of metaphysical narrative about abundance and prosperity and the end of competition, a sharing economy, and, creative visualization and all these types of things, ending negativity. At that point in my life, I was sort of prone to that sort of language, and many of my friends were. And once you get into it, I experienced the power of this promise of unlimited income. If you can be led into that make-believe world in which exponential expansion is possible, it then looks like a pathway in which money could just keep flowing to you as long as the program continues. And if you buy that, you have now entered a make-believe world in which actually financial security is totally assured forever and for anyone who joins. And of course, what you don't realize is that you walk around, I say you, meaning all of us, walk around with a cloud over us about financial insecurity. And I think this is true even for billionaires, that we all feel like, well, it could end. How am I going to do this? Will it keep going? How am I going to pay for that? What am I going to do with this debt? And so on. It's all lifted. Now imagine a life in which you really don't have any thought. Prosperity is a given. It creates a euphoria, a kind of ecstasy. And I tasted that. I experienced that. And I saw it also among so many people. You kind of go mad. That's the power of when this ended, and it was ended actually by the police, in this case, the local police broke up the scheme, which had thousands and thousands of people involved in it in South Florida where I was living. I came to my senses. And my first question to myself was, how did I not see that? How could I have thought that? And how is it that I turned all my friends into prospects? In other words, how is it that I so easily converted all my friendships and family and so on into commercial transactions? And that just captivated me. I had to understand it. And when I went to research it, I discovered very little is written about pyramid schemes. And so I started studying and reading. Of course, I was doing my ongoing work. It's not like I stopped what I was doing. And so this went on for quite some years as I kind of looked into this further and further. And first I learned that particular scheme, which was called the airplane game, had been in various parts of the United States. It was in New York. They think it began somewhere in the Seattle area, possibly Vancouver. It was huge in Texas, parts of California. And when it ended in New York, there was a flurry of litigation, as you might think that would happen in New York. And that was in the media. So I then just continued researching it. While I was doing this, again in South Florida, multi-level marketing just exploded in South Florida. Now we're into the early 90s. Mm. And every person who had been in that earlier scheme joined multi-level marketing schemes. And I began receiving the phone calls to join. And of course, by now I knew what was happening. I tried to explain to my friends that it's a fraud. Mm-hmm. This is a scam. You're going to lose. If you don't lose, everybody you recruit is going to lose. And oh, no, you don't understand, Bob. This is a product-based company. This has sales. This has products. But of course, I could see the endless chain was exactly the same. They just using products instead of just handing money back and forth. You bought products. So my research had to include that, and what I thought might be just a paper I might write, an article or something, turned into a book. And the book came out in late 97. And almost immediately, I got a call from CBS 60 Minutes. I mean, it's not like the book was a huge seller, but somehow they discovered they're looking around for who knows something about pyramid schemes. Just as I had found nobody seemed to be writing, they found me because I turned up to be on CBS 60 Minutes. I was interviewed by Mike Wallace. It was about a company that was a multi-level marketing company. It was prosecuted by the SEC. After that, I was contacted by some attorneys to help them in a lawsuit against Amway. And it sort of took off from there.
Big name Amway.
Amway is the biggest of all those schemes and the oldest currently. It's the oldest ongoing multi-level marketing company. So that sort of established me in that area. It's still, I would not call it a field. You know, I have a few peers, there's a few people, but not many. There's a few lawyers that have specialized in this, a couple of academics around the world. Millions and millions of people are affected, but very few stay around to try and plumb it and understand it, and as I have done. And I've continued to write. And then 2001, I with two other people that had found me, we set up a website that we thought would become, a source for people who were confused and trying to figure this stuff out. It was called Pyramid Scheme Alert. We organized it as a nonprofit, and it's been ongoing since then. It has no advertising of any kind on it, no Google ads or anything. It's purely, and it's all free. There's a couple of booklets people can buy, but 99% of everything on there is free. And it's had literally millions of visitors over the years. It's been around now almost 20 years. So
it's a long and storied history. There's so much there that we could pull on. One of the thoughts that came up in my mind, what you describe, was very similar. You know Steve Hassan, who's this cult expert, and the way you describe how you got involved in this scheme sounded very similar to the way in which he describes how he got involved in the reunification church. And there's a point of, I guess we all experience these points in our lives of vulnerability, or you said you were looking for the language that was used with you resonated, and there are points in all our lives where we feel a little bit more vulnerable and we're probably more susceptible to these types of tactics. And it's interesting the parallels between a cult, a religious cult, and a multi-level marketing scheme. There's a lot here, but it might be interesting to just explore that and some of the techniques that are used to recruit people.
Well, usually in discussions of multi-level marketing, it starts and usually ends with discussing the economics, exponential, unsustainable.
Well, let's talk about that. Could we just talk about that for just a moment? I was involved in someone recruited me to sell knives when I was a university student. Similar thing, door-to-door, multi-level marketing. And I quit but I already started, and I quit when I realized the math, that half the country would have to buy these things for everybody here to succeed. So, and the odds just didn't seem to compute. And I left as a result of that. But maybe we could just start there and then talk a little bit about the magical thinking side of it.
Yeah, that you did the math. Of course, that's the buzzkill.
Mm-hmm.
I described that ecstasy, that make-believe fairyland world of unlimited possibility and unlimited income, end of scarcity, abundance now for the rest of you. Okay, the buzzkill for that is calculator or doing the math, which you did, and which so much of the marketing for these schemes is to keep you from ever doing that. But that you've put your finger on the flaw, you might say. It looked like a sales company. You're out there knocking on doors. Well, some of them you don't even knock on nowadays. You just go on Facebook. But back then you would go and call on people. But could you actually make money going door to door selling knives? It would be very, very difficult, a brutal way to try to make money. And how far would you have to travel, and how many doors would you have to knock on? Would somebody buy from you again? So each customer is a one-off, and so on. It actually is not feasible. But at that age, how would you know? Actually, at any age, unless you've been in sales, you often don't know what the proposition that you're getting into entails. So how do you make money at that scheme then? Well, the guy that recruited you is making some money on you, plus maybe 10 others that he recruited. And maybe the guy that recruited him is making money off all those he recruited and maybe 4 others who did similar recruiting. Now, they're getting cuts, no pun intended, off of each of your knife sales. And you need a lot of them. And that's where the money is made. So, but of course, the problem is, how do you get somebody to go out knocking on doors if they can't make money doing that? You have to lie. So the whole thing is premised on a victim. The victim isn't the person buying the knives. As far as I know, that the company that you're talking about made decent knives. It didn't need to make crappy knives. They might have been a little pricey, but it didn't even have to be too pricey, because knives, can be of all qualities. Very hard to judge that. That's not the point. The point is the model is based on you not making money, but doing basically free labor. So it's a. Now you're a student at the time, so it probably didn't ruin you, but other schemes could reach somebody when they've just become unemployed and they've got a home mortgage to. And instead of going and getting a job, they take that. They waste 3 months and they lose their home. Or they get told, well, you got to work harder. You need to keep at it. So they remortgage the house, or they take on credit card debt or whatever, because they're told, there is success at this. But so it has a tremendous destructive potential for an individual person. But that is essentially the flaw of it, is that it's all Ponzi schemes, all pyramid schemes have this one common trait. It's not the only trait, but it's the most obvious and the most significant, which is the endless chain. Idea that I recruit 5 and I can make money on them, plus the 5 they each recruit. There's 25, plus the 5, there's 30. That sounds pretty good. But the last 25 now, they have to do the same thing.
And you have to get to something, you do 20 or 15 iterations of that, some ridiculously small number, and you get half the population of the world or something.
Yeah, well, I've said this, and I actually did that on the 60 Minutes. So all the years back was, if you multiply 5 times 5, I think it's 13 times, depending on how you count, whether you start with 1 or you start with 5, and whether the last level couldn't do it or the last level is already, it doesn't really matter. 13 or so levels, you exceed the population of the Earth, which is over 7 billion people. So the average person, this is truly a blind spot. Another example I use for people on this, on the power of exponential. Take a penny. I give you a proposition, 1 penny in your hand. I'll either give you $1 million in your hand right now, or you'll take the penny and you will double that penny every day for just 30 days. So day 1, you got 1 penny. Day 2, you got 2 pennies. Day 3, you got 4. And you got 26 more days left. Well, it seems impossible, but it is true that the 30th day it goes to almost $5 million. Mm-hmm. So you would have left out 4 million by taking the million. Who could see that? Now, of course, some people can, who understand. Most people would say, no, can't be. I'll take the million. So that's the other weird thing about this. Math-oriented people can see it. But the weird other thing about that, if you look at that chart of a penny going up to almost 5 million there at the end, it doesn't really turn into the gigantic numbers until the very end. So, and that's true exactly in the way multi-level marketing. You have to have a huge downline for it to start making money. If you start at the bottom, you're doomed straight out. So the only people that are really going to make money are those that have started up the scheme, or those who might bring the scheme to a brand new area of the world, which is kind of like starting up again. But everybody else, very quickly, almost immediately after it's launched, they're doomed. They're the person knocking on the doors, and it's not possible. It's just not possible in the real world for those people to make money. So the whole thing is based on a big lie. It's a financial trap. And Ponzi schemes and pyramid schemes are, because of that, because of their inherent fraudulence, are normally thought of as illegal. But multi-level marketing, which we've just described here, which is based on this same model as a classic chain letter, is not illegal.
And so it's something like 1% of the people, normally the ones at the top, that make money. Is that right? Could you break that down for us in terms of what the studies suggest?
Yeah. In a given year, so about 1%, sometimes it's a little more, would be in a profitable position. That is, they would be gaining in overrides from the labors and the purchases of the people below them, enough to call it profitable income and worthwhile. Mm-hmm. But that 1%, which seems incredible, people would say that can't be. But first of all, we know at the bottom, the people there, as we said, they're not going to make money. Actually, you were selling something where it was kind of at that era, in that time, you could go knock on a door and sell a knife. It could be done.
I sold quite a few of them to friends and relatives, but I ran out of people to sell them to as well. So But
even if you went out cold calling and knocked on doors, you might find a few that you could buy. It would seem, especially if you said you're a college student, you might get away with it. Mm-hmm. But most of these products really aren't even feasible. And today, in the 21st century, even in the last 3-4 decades, actually, it's gotten harder and harder to go knock on anybody's door. They have called the police. They're not home. And they don't have time to have you come in the house. Once somebody's working, all that. It's an old model from a bygone era. So, now those people are already, let's just take our little model, 1 times 5 one recruit 5, 5 recruit 25. So we have 31 people altogether. But notice that 25 of them are at the dead bottom. If you need recruits, well, of course, they can't get recruits because they're at the bottom. They don't have recruits. So 25 out of 31, that's over 80%, right, are already. So we know that the vast majority will, by their position, be failures. Mm-hmm. Now you say, oh, wait, they could recruit. And they get 125. They each have got 5 people. Mm-hmm. But again, that can't keep going. And if you need, maybe 30 or 40 below you before you start making money, the bottom are going to constitute at least 90% of the total, just by the math of that. How many are below the top? Because the bottom is always bigger than the upper level. So the bottom levels will constitute over 90%. So you don't have to do a lot of math. You just look at it. Open your eyes, look at the design. You see the vast majority are going to be in losing positions, so they'll lose. But it's actually far worse than that, because what happens is just what you did. They quit. Maybe they don't figure it out the way you did, but they just figure, I'm not making any money, and now I've sold my family and friends, and they're not too happy about it because I kind of pressured them. Now, it's like
they felt like they were doing me a favor, right, by buying these products.
Yeah,
so
you used up all your capital.
Yeah.
They call it. Oh my God, he's here. He goes. What do you want?
Yeah.
No, I'm just calling really to visit. No. So you kind of sullied your relationship. Now you didn't do too bad, but it could have been a lot worse. Mm-hmm. So you'll quit. So the point is, in a year's time, in most of these companies, 50 to 80% of the people are going to turn over. They're going to churn. Mm-hmm. Okay. So now let's calculate this. We said maybe a couple percent at the top are positioned to make money. The vast majority are positioned so they can't make money. That's predetermined by their position, by the structure of this thing. But what if that bottom level that we said can't make money is an ever-churning group? So maybe it's 1,000 were in it in 1 year, but half of them quit. So the next year, it's 1,000 again, but really there were 500 new ones that went in. So the real total of the people that lost money is not 1,000, it's 15, it's maybe 1,500. So the percent of the winners, the people at the top, that stays the same. Those people are kind of moving from year to year. The bottom level is churning. So if you put it in a 5-year, you would see that the percent of people that make money of all the people who churn through there is a percent of a percent.
Wow. And then when you think about the social costs as well, because you talked about not having any reference points, a lot of people get into these schemes, and I know you advised on the case against Herbalife, for example. They target the Latino community, for example, very close-knit communities, and you, on the one hand, don't have any information about the likelihood of success. On the other hand, you have all your friends who, or could be just one friend, who's saying this is a great thing, et cetera, and it becomes easy, very easy, I would have thought, to go into one of these schemes, particularly if you're vulnerable. I'm wondering whether or not now, given coronavirus and economic downturn, that there'll be another wave of these things, because there are a whole bunch of people that are feeling vulnerable and economically.
It's already happening.
Yeah,
it's. I mean, literally, it is. You're perceiving what will happen. It already began. It has begun. As soon as the first lockdowns occurred, which was back in April, May. Mm-hmm. People lost their jobs, millions and millions. The unemployment rate reached Depression era levels. These schemes immediately changed their message to, well, you're stuck at home. We have a home-based income opportunity. So you not only, that sounds great. I'm already stuck at home because I'm unemployed, plus because of the quarantining. And they're saying I can make money from home. That's perfect. Plus, I don't have any income unless you got some unemployment. But even with that, here they're telling me I can actually, now that I'm home, I can make a lot of money. So what could be better? And what else have I got to be doing right now? Right? Watch Netflix. So it has spread like wildfire during this period. And some of these companies are experiencing tremendous growth right now. As the economy tailspins, as all these people are unemployed and so on, stuck at home, the scam proposition is spreading all over the place like a virus, like a virus. And it is a virus. It's like a virus in which officially the government never admits it exists.
Yeah, why aren't these things illegal? What's behind all of that?
Well, you mentioned my book, and so I've been at this for a long time. Over 20 years, I've been studying and reading about it, and then through Pyramid Scheme Alert, I have interacted over the years with thousands of people that have been involved. I've also talked to media. I've probably been interviewed more than any. I'm like the talking head or the one sentence where there is a critic who says it's not all great, and things. So. And I've been on a few documentaries and all. So I've been immersed in the question. Of course, in every encounter, somebody asks, why is it illegal? How could it be legal? Chain letters are illegal if you have to put money in. Ponzi schemes are illegal. Right? So why isn't this? It's called multi-level marketing, but anybody in it within 10 minutes can see it's a recruiting scheme, an endless recruit. How could that, if endless chain recruiting is illegal, and that's why a Ponzi scheme is illegal, I mean, then why wouldn't this be illegal? Well, strangely, I never really went back to truly see, well, how did it all begin? And I knew a little bit about the court cases that had ensued over the years, but I really didn't have the full picture of the unfolding of this thing. And when I finally did that in writing this book, what you discover is something sort of quite mundane, but also quite revealing about how the world works and certainly how our government works. So the story is pretty simple. The scheme actually began in 1945. That the first one was invented in 1945. Now, bear in mind, there had never been such a thing. A sales company based on a pyramid scheme didn't exist. Nobody knew what it was. Even the concept of investing through a pyramid scheme or a Ponzi scheme was a kind of a outside the law. A little, we weren't used to it. Mm-hmm. Charles Ponzi, the person whose scheme became the namesake of all Ponzi schemes, that was in 1920. And the government had a very difficult time. They had 3 trials before they finally brought him down and deported him. The first one was for mail fraud. He represented himself in court and won. Right? The jury found him not guilty.
Wow.
Because they couldn't quite grasp. All he was doing was taking the money from the newer investors and giving it to the earlier investors. But he claimed he was trading postage coupons, international postage coupons. But it didn't matter because he was actually paying people and so on. And he claimed he could have if it had just been allowed to continue. So the point is the law really wasn't prepared for this. They just didn't know. To this day, we do not have a federal law that has the word pyramid scheme in it. We have no law against pyramid schemes. So eventually the government concluded that the Ponzi scheme, as he created it, is fraud. So when Bernard Madoff's scheme was revealed, that he was doing exactly the same thing. Nothing really had changed. This was, he went down in 1908, so from 1920 to 2008, so 80 years later or so. Exactly the same thing. Tells people he's making these stock trades. He wasn't. He took the money from the later investors, gave it to the earlier ones year after year after year. He did this for about a dozen years or more. They didn't have to prove it was a, quote, Ponzi scheme. They just took one look at it. The money's coming from the later investors, being transferred deceptively, fraud. Okay. Now, 1945, we get the same model, basically, but it's now disguised not through fake claims of trades, but of actual buy-sell transactions of products. So you join, you have to, now you don't have to sell, Ben, this is something important we didn't say when you were talking about your knives. In the newer schemes, I could just sell you a product like vitamins. That's a good one. You buy $100 of these vitamins. Now, this is a miracle vitamin. It's a great vitamin. It's going to ward off all kinds of things and ensure that your vitality is stronger than everybody else. You buy it for $100. Now, you can sell it, and you can sell it at maybe 40% markup or something like that. But you have to buy it you have to produce at least $100 a month for you to stay qualified. So you sign up on an auto order, they call it. Every month, $100 worth of vitamins is going to come to your door. It's going to be credited to your, against your credit card. Now you're qualified. Now, if you recruit me, I'll be told to do the same thing. Neither one of us have sold a damn thing. We bought it. But the people who recruited you and you recruited me, they're making money on our purchases. If you happen to sell your product, so you go out back to your relatives again and say you got this great vitamin, and they say, oh, geez, he needs help again, we're going to help him out, and they buy it. That's fine, and you can recoup some of your money if you could find enough relatives and friends to do that. You probably won't. But the point is, the guy who recruited you won't make any more money if you resell the product than if you don't. He makes the money as soon as you place your order. You'll make money on me the moment I place my orders. And that's how it mostly works now. People aren't, obviously they're not out selling because you would see them, right? Where are they? Millions of people mostly selling these goods. You'd be inundated with salespeople. You never are. So they don't actually sell. So the new scheme was disguised as a sales company. The salespeople were unwittingly the customers. And they had this added advantage of they could actually make money if they recruit some other salespeople. And the original product was in fact a vitamin pill, right? So now that scheme ran from, it began in 1945, and it ran all the way up into about 1960, so almost 20 years before people in the government began receiving complaints that I think I was scammed here. I signed up buying this stuff. They told me I could sell. You really can't sell it. And they told me I had to recruit other people. I found, how many people can I recruit? I think this is illegal. This looks like a Ponzi scheme. And so finally the government in the 60s decided to kill this thing off. It took them a while to get it. Now, in the meantime, the very first MLM actually did get prosecuted by the FDA because, what a surprise, they were claiming these pills would cure cancer and arthritis, headaches, and everything else. They got prosecuted for that. But they weren't prosecuted for running a pyramid scheme because, well, again, the government really didn't have laws. They didn't have statutes. The states didn't have statutes for a pyramid sales company. So in the 60s, they began calling them endless chain schemes or pyramid sales schemes. And state laws were written to stop it. And they began getting prosecutions. And in the early 70s, there was a federal bill proposed that would outlaw it. And it was actually introduced into Congress by Walter Mondale. And it did not pass in the mid-70s. And also in the 70s now, the FTC went after the largest ones. And here we get to the question of legality. So how did it happen? On their face, they are endless chains. The loss rates were documented. The saturation factor was proven. The first two schemes to be prosecuted were shut down as endless chain. And what the FTC had done, they didn't charge them with criminal fraud. They charged them with an unfair and deceptive trade practice. And I think the government's view was, we'll shut down the model, we'll end this whole thing. There's only a few of them. They're huge. They've got hundreds of thousands of people in them. But we'll prosecute them in this way. They'll go away. And what happened is the third company that they went after was Amway. And Amway at that time already had become extremely politically active. And that was one reason that the federal bill did not pass in Congress. They had enough votes in the House of Representatives to prevent that. When the government was prosecuting Amway, this was from 74 or so up to 79. If you go back and look at your history, an amazing thing occurred at that time. The president of the United States resigned in disgrace. This was Richard Nixon. Who took over as vice president and became president? Gerald Ford. And Gerald Ford happened to be the U.S. congressman from Grand Rapids, Michigan. And he was a tremendous beneficiary of Amway. And in fact, they funded his library later. The Secretary of State, Alexander Haig, became an Amway consultant, and so on. So I argue in the book, again, who knows, because it's behind closed doors, but that Amway succeeded in getting the FTC at that time to decide that it was not a pyramid scheme. The ruling, if you go back and read it, is astounding to read, makes no sense. How could an endless chain? The Federal Trade Commission attorneys had documented saturation. They used exactly the same logic that they used in the other two cases. The other two were called Holiday Magic and Costco. Endless chain, saturation, unsustainable, 5 times 5 times 5, can't keep going. Bottom have to lose, can't tell them that they're going to lose, so you have to deceive them. That was their argument, kind of math plus logic plus common sense. Suddenly, Amway said, no, we're different. One reason Amway story, I think, was bought by the government was strictly it had political power. The two owners, one had already, during their period of growth from 1960 up to 1972, he had become the chairman of the board of the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. And the other one, Richard DeVos, was the finance chairman of the National Republican Party. So they had tremendous, they also posed as very pious Christians and conservative Republicans. In other words, the epitome of proper, civic-minded, benevolent kind of person, trying to help the little guy, trying to help little people become entrepreneurs, the perfect capitalism. They actually had Ronald Reagan by 1982. Ronald Reagan got elected. Richard DeVos was the finance chairman of the Republican Party and did more than any one person in the country to get Reagan elected. Ronald Reagan came to an Amway meeting 2 years later. So they went from being prosecuted for fraud or unfair and deceptive trade in 75 to 79. 3 years later, they have Ronald Reagan speaking at their annual meeting. So they, with Reagan in the presidency, with the political power they had amassed, it was declared somehow different because products sold, because it's a buy-sell transaction. It's presented as a sales company. The government just sort of looked the other way. And I'll just go add one other thing. Why would the government embrace this? It wasn't just straight payoff. It wasn't. There was a hell of a lot of that. But, what we call lobbying and donations, campaign donations. There's plenty of that. But also, think of the story of Amway. The American dream by mid-80s was already tarnished. This is when the beginning of outsourcing and the beginning of downsizing. This is the crushing of the labor unions. And the middle class began its descent. So here's the story, though. The American dream is not dead. It's perfectly alive. In fact, millions of people are out there hitting the streets, doing the great Yankee peddler, courageous, persistent Yankee peddler. And this company, Amway, and companies like it are helping people with, no capital hardly. They can build their own home-based business. The American dream is alive and well. It's better than ever. We have this new model, multi-level marketing. It's the best capitalism can offer. And that's exactly the story it has sold to every other country it has gone to.
Right.
This is what we have. You want capitalism in your country? Here it is. So it was a perfect story for a politician. It allowed them not to address inflation, unemployment, declining wages, declining home ownerships, and they didn't have to do anything about that. They could just say, it's all up to you. And if you're failing...
Except it's built on a fraud, which is very disturbing.
Built on a lie, yes, yeah. Built on a lie, built on a fraud. And then by that period, after, this was 1979, when the FTC exonerated Amway and allowed the model, then the model exploded and began doubling. Ex-Amway people became Herbalife people, became Nu Skin people, became Mary Kay, and all these others, but they were all based on the Amway model, and the Amway model was based on the first one, Nutrilite, which I said started in 1945, and the connection is, of course, the two guys that I referred to, the founders of Amway, Richard DeVos and Jay Van Andel, worked at Nutrilite for 10 years. That's where they trained. And then what they did is they defected about 1960, started their own company, took 5,000 of the sales, so-called sales, their downline, took them, brought them over, pirated them over, and just changed the product. Everything else was the same. They changed the name, they changed the product, but behind that, of course, is the model. And this explosive, electrifying model promising people unlimited income, unlimited potential, and an end to scarcity and so on. Exactly the same spiel that I got when I joined that ridiculous scheme that I was in, so many years before. Only then they add on the camouflage of, looks like a sales company. You're buying, selling products, laundry soap.
And the products don't really matter. They could be great products, but the math just, you run out of customers. Even if the products are the greatest things in the world.
Yeah, the products are, if you examine this coldly as a business model, the products become not what the business is about at all. Whereas in real sales company, of course, the product is very, very important because there are factors of demand and repeat customers. There are products, these all things come into play. How many people need the product? But if you're not really selling the product, you're selling the income opportunity. The income opportunity is unlimited. Everybody on earth wants more money. And you've already established that saturation, even human saturation, not product demand saturation, human saturation doesn't exist. You've diverted people from getting their calculator out and seeing that. So it's a model, and the way I describe it is it's a scam engaged in sales, whereas you have in real world, you have sales companies engaging in scam activity or scam behavior. But this is a scam engaging in sales behavior. So the products, I've compared the products to cheese on a mousetrap. It's there. It's important. The mouse is lured to the trap by the smell and the look of the cheese. But if you were to stop the little mouse and try to explain to him what's about to happen, but instead of telling him about the spring-loaded device that will flip onto his neck and kill him, you started telling him about the cheese only. It's not really that good a cheese. It's kind of old. It's actually Cheese Whiz. They didn't even give you good cheese. Or if they told you it's actually not bad cheese, you wouldn't have helped the mouse at all, right? So the products, and so many people, they look at multi-level marketing, they kind of smell that it's a scam, and they really want it, but they're not they can't even imagine this idea of something this big, legalized by the government, and something that has this mythological, aura about it of opportunity, American dream, entrepreneurship. They can't really imagine that could be just a disguised fraud. So they start looking where you normally look for scam in sales, in the product, or the price. So, but the truth is the product is kind of irrelevant. They are often misrepresented. They are often exaggerated. They're often silly products. The price can be exorbitant, but it doesn't actually have to be wildly exorbitant but they often are because, well, why wouldn't they be? If you've convinced somebody that they're going to make money through recruiting, does it really matter what the price of the product is? It doesn't really matter. So why not go ahead and jack up the price of the product too?
Also, this veneer of this magical thinking, this is, if it is to be, it is up to me, this language, the secret, all of this stuff that keeps coming, it's just recycled over and over again from all of the examples that you gave. But somebody who's the recipient of that, who buys into that, then feels a sense of shame if they're not making it, hitting their numbers. It must be, if it is to be, it is up to me. It must be me. I might not be working hard enough. I might not be doing enough. And so your critical thinking faculties start to go, and there's also, you don't want to turn around and say, well, I didn't make it because I wasn't good enough, all of those types of things. So we don't have honest conversations, I suspect, with people who went into some of these schemes and came out the other end.
Yeah, the American dream, notice that the American dream is always an individual dream. It's not a collective dream. We're not all going to do better together. It's not a labor union dream, right? It's not a social movement dream. It's a very private, individualistic dream. It's designed for the individual person on their own, by themselves, to succeed. And because it's based that way, failure is also private and individual. So the American dream myth, and there are people that will argue that America is not really a land of opportunity. I think George Carlin was the one who said it's called the American dream because you have to be asleep to believe in it. But let's put that aside. That's not really the point exactly. But the point I'm making is that the myth, and it is a myth, a cultural myth. Other countries have it. China has sort of adopted it. They now have the China myth, the China dream, rather, the China dream. And we have the American dream. But it is a mythology. And the mythology is an individualistic thing. So the flip side of the American dream is that if you don't succeed, it's your fault. That is the story. Now, that's very generalized. So that's why we kind of don't have sympathy in America for poor people, even though, hell, now it's almost half the population is poor. But, there isn't a cultural outrage about poverty. We don't say our system failed us. How could it be that we'd have all these homeless people that can't afford a house and so on? How could they not have health? There's something wrong with it. We don't say that. We say, what's wrong with them? What's going on with those poor people? They can't make it. So, but that's very generalized. Now, multi-level marketing took that now as almost its brand and drove this message, specialized in this message. We're going to be the disguise, the parody of the American dream. But we're going to use that American dream. We're going to hold the banner higher than anybody. We're going to be the paragon of the American dream in our story. So now we're going to have to drive, and we're going to not just say in a general way, you can succeed. We're going to say you can succeed in this business. American dream can be interpreted, and some people do, is that it doesn't have to mean I'm going to make a lot of money. It could mean you were free to write a book, or you were free to have a nice family, or to travel, to pursue intellectual things, So multi-level marketing took it and said, no, it means this business, because it's the greatest business on earth. the American dream means you will succeed at this. And if you fail, now they're going to turn this general theme that if you fail, it's your fault. We're going to turn it into a hammer. We're going to say, there's only one reason you could fail at this. It's you. System, they claim, best in the world, the greatest opportunity in the world. As they like to say, the system works at 100% if you work the system 100%. So the only reason you could fail is that you didn't work it enough or hard enough. And they pound this away from the day you come into an MLM scheme, that only way you could lose here is if you quit. But, the only people who quit are losers, right? So they have these thought-stopping aphorisms, as they say, that, oh my God, if I quit, I'm a loser. The only way I could lose is if I quit. You're trapped. And so they will drive that in, and they will portray the quitter and loser as this low down person of low character, connected with poverty, lacking ambition, addicted to drama, and having not enough in their lives, even won't take care of their family, doesn't think enough of his own spouse and children to do what's needed to be successful, and you quit. They can portray this person in a really vile manner. And so those who quit take on that. And it is a curse. And it is in sales, in sales, they have this thing called the button up in direct selling and all sales. So you've made a sale, but you know that you've kind of pressured the person. You've sold them a story. You're worried that they're going to come out of that sale, the spell will lift, and they're going to cancel. So in sales, they have a thing called the button up. And the button up is a way to kind of prevent that person from canceling on you. So you may say, are you sure this is what you wanted now? Because, if you want to cancel, you do it now. I mean, please don't. And there's a psychology to this, that if you challenge the person to cancel, then they won't later either. Even if they might want to, now they're kind of shamed into not doing it.
Or you make them feel special, right? So you say, this is not for everyone. It's only for special people. I think you are one, but if you don't think you quite have it, then tell me now.
That's it.
What are they going to do, right?
Selling the knives, And so that's, or any sale, all sales are like this. But in multi-level marketing now, where you've sold them nothing worse than you've sold them this phony opportunity, your greatest dread, just as the individual sale, the greatest dread is to come back to the sales office and your manager says, hey, your customer called this morning and canceled. Didn't you button them up? Well, in multi-level marketing, what they're afraid of is you're going to break the spell and go to the police and say, these people lied to me up and down, and look at how it works. It was impossible for me to have made money. But they got me to buy this. I signed a contract. I even recruited my friends. So they have to drive that loser-quitter story, the loser story, real hard. They have to put that curse on you. And it results in silencing people. I mean, now you walk out the door, you didn't succeed, you had your hopes raised. You're certainly not going to go broadcasting that you failed. In addition, you may have recruited a few friends. Are you going to go back and make amends with them? What about the friend that invited you in? So you're caught in a web, a social and a psychological web that will generally and usually does. I mean, it really is very powerful, prevents people. I will say that today it seems the spell is lifting because there are online, there's an anti-MLM Reddit has, I think, 650,000 subscribers. And there are YouTube channels that are nothing but anti-MLM, people just pouring out their vitriol, their anger, outrage, and their regret at having been in these things and trying to warn people. So, but that is the challenge of the MLM scheme is to prevent the spell from being broken, prevent the truth from ever being told. They have an enormous investment in keeping the truth. And that's why this is often called the big lie. Hitler coined the term big lie in Mein Kampf, a lie so enormous in its scale, so audacious, that a normal person would never believe that someone would have, as he put it, the impudence to perpetrate it. It's beyond imagination. Little lies, we all tell those, so they catch you in a little lie. But a big lie, so outrageous, they don't imagine it. Well, a scheme presented to the world as the greatest income opportunity in the world. Millions of people are in it. Ronald Reagan, the presidents and all have endorsed it. Chamber of Commerce endorses it. They hold these gigantic rallies, have pop stars, singers, politicians, clergy. You're going to walk in there and say, it's a whole big scam. No, that's a big lie. That's a lie. So the lie is so big, the average person cannot imagine it. But it does seem the lie is tarnishing these days. More and more people are telling.
I hope so. You always also get this. I remember when I was in this company, I also went to a couple of Amway things when I just shortly after this, because I did a term paper on it for a political economy class. So I went sort of undercover, but they are like religious events, and they shun any what they call negativity. So you're not allowed to think critically or say anything that sort of, any critical questions. You're not allowed to ask simple questions.
Now, Ben, I would say, at the very beginning of our conversation, you jumped quickly into the question of a cult. And I said, usually, the conversation about MLMs starts with the economics, kind of unraveling, lifting the disguise and taking away the costume, but which we've done, I think. We've tried to here, or we've certainly addressed it. But where it goes after that is exactly where you and I are winding up here. It isn't enough to just flim-flam somebody financially, not on this scale. It isn't enough. You have to silence them when they quit, of course. That's part of it. But you also have to prevent them from as you just said, thinking critically. You have to keep them in. You have to make it difficult for them to quit. You have to separate them from reality, and you have to take away their critical thinking faculties. Now, that is exactly the definition of a cult. That is what a cult does. I mean, there are other characteristics, but that is fundamentally, when you say somebody is under the spell of a cult, and they are captivated by a cult, and where people go and seek out professionals like Steve Hassan and say, help us, our son, our daughter has been, we think, were they kidnapped? No, they're there on seemingly their free will, but we've talked to her or we've talked to him, and they're not themselves. They repeat the same words over and over. They have a funny look about them. They're dressing differently, and they practically worship this person who is the leader of this thing. Something is wrong, but what is it? And we need help. Well, they're in a cult. And, of course, cults are a kind of mysterious thing. What the heck? What are we talking about? I mean, this is a free country. You just said they can walk away anytime they want, but they don't. What's going on here? What's wrong? Is there something wrong about this? Well, potentially a cult could be kind of not necessarily a bad thing. It could be a good thing. Certain religious cults might be thought of as good. Some people call them Marine Corps cult. So I mean, there could be elements of what makes a cult a bad thing. Well, they become described as a destructive cult. A destructive cult is abusing this person's mentally and psychologically, and they often are defrauding them of money or taking their labor for free or sexually exploiting them. Right? That's when you can see this is something wrong. And we did have one in which a multi-level marketing scheme called Nexium just recently was in the news. And the head of this thing, a guy named Keith Raniere, had really enslaved these people. And he had a background in Amway. He had a background in Consumers Byline, I think was his other scheme. He had created one. He had been prosecuted for running pyramid schemes before. And then this newest one, Nexium, that he created, kind of sold enlightenment courses. Right? But the point is, it was multi-level marketing. It was structured where you could make income by bringing people in and so on. But he had captivated these people to where he had enslaved them. And as they showed in the court, he physically abused, sexually abused them, even physically branded these people, some of them. He's serving a life sentence. So that's the power of cult. So the question always comes up, is multi-level marketing a cult, or what does it mean? And it's very hard. First of all, as we said, a cult itself is something some people say can't exist. There is an element of denial that, of course, when you see somebody in a cult, you say, well, something's going on there that doesn't seem right. And the potential for abuse is, and we've had some horrible destructive cults. We've had ones that caused people to commit mass suicide. We had one in Japan that tried to use a sarin gas in a subway and with plans to kill thousands and thousands of people. That was their intention. So, cults clearly have some capacity for terrible consequences. So when you say multi-level marketing is a cult, it's not a small thing.
Mm-hmm.
Talk about some. So first, the cult itself, it's difficult to describe it. Now we're going to say a business is a cult. Well, to most people, that's an impossibility. A business is the opposite of, cults need utopia, right? They need a make-believe world and so on. But business is the opposite. Business kind of shocks you into the real world.
Mm-hmm.
It's measurable. They're constantly measuring, profit, loss, costs. It's hard work. It's hardly euphoric. And then there's this element of profit. If you're not making profit, that kind of, like I say, that'll kill the buzz pretty quick when you lose money. So it would seem that a business is impossible. Also, we tend to identify cults as sort of exotic, marginal. People dress funny. They maybe have a funny name. And they maybe have odd beliefs, flying saucers, lifting up into heaven, but multi-level marketing is talking about, uses the language of capitalism. It uses the language of business. They dress in business suits, so on.
And they sell products that compete with all kinds of products we find in supermarkets.
Type products. They're not selling. Some of them sell some funny things, but in general, the products are sort of commodity. So the disguise there is almost so. And this, and I trace this in the book. The cult element is clearly there. The cult identity is there. They have the hero worship or the leader worship. This is built in. They call it exalting the leader. They have proprietary language that only once you get in use. They urge you to disassociate yourself from people who are not in. They actively discourage critical thinking. They call it negative thinking. I have a story in the book where I was undercover with some Canadian TV producers for public television in Canada. They asked me at an MLM meeting. I was there with them. They had hidden cameras to get up and ask a question. And I got up and asked the question. And the guy had just explained how you recruit a few who recruit others and so on. And the crowd was all happy listening to the possibility. And I said, well, I just did the numbers and, I'm standing up and I've got a little calculator with me and and my calculator shows that this couldn't keep going just a few levels. We'd run out of people in Canada. We were in Canada at the time. And so I thought, how's he going to get out of that one? So what he did is he didn't even look at me. He just looked at the audience and he said to the audience, now see, this is what I'm talking about. Here, I've just presented this enormous opportunity to you. But what does this guy do? He grabs a calculator. Like, you have to seize this opportunity. You don't go running for a calculator. If you need a calculator to be successful, well, this is not for you. See? In other words, it's about belief. It's about optimism. It's about seeing the vision, which he was saying, you're not doing that. You're running over to your calculator. People are going to be successful. They would never pick up a calculator. They just get out there and do it, you know. So they have they actively and they expertly separate you from reality, give you a special language, separate you from your friends, and introduce a utopian world to you of make-believe, in which believing will make it so. And only by believing will it happen. Reality is not real or fixed. There is no reality. There's only what you make it to be. So now we are in nothing is real and nothing is true unless you say it. Well, now they've separated you from your past identity, your relationships, given you new language, and they've also told you what you thought you knew wasn't necessarily true. Well, what is true then? Well, there's the leader telling you what's true. How do you know what he says is true? He's wearing a Rolex watch. Did you see his car out in the parking lot? Right? And other people have done it, and he's selling you the tools for breaking out of your whole life of disappointment, failure, and inadequate performance and so on. And he's going to show you the way. And that's why he's the guru and deserving of your exaltation, of your respect. So you can see now, aren't we describing a cult here? We are describing it. And it's a cult, and I call it in the book, it's a cult of capitalism. It has taken the language of capitalism, and actually all cults take language from something. They never create a brand new thing. And this is a little stretch for some people, but I think it's anything can be turned into a cult that is a belief system. Christianity can be a Christian cult. We've certainly seen ISIS as a Muslim cult, right? It took the beliefs of the Muslim faith, which are peaceful, like all religions, but turned it into this violent thing. So couldn't capitalism also be turned into a cult? Of course it can. And that is really what you've got. You've got this, it's a grotesque distortion of the general principles of a market, and to where it's now all about belief, and it's about, and success, by the way, now the American dream, you don't see this immediately at first, but they have narrowly defined success to mean one thing: money. And money and this business. Everything else becomes irrelevant. Everything else.
Could we just, I'm conscious of time, but I did want to touch on the international expansion of some of these companies. That Herbalife is all over the world, and
they're in every country.
Yeah, Arbonne and all of these companies. And the American dream, obviously it plays well in the United States, but I'm just wondering if you had any thoughts on how that plays elsewhere around the world.
Let me tie back into that, if I can, weave back in, because I kind of realized we didn't really address this. The element of risk, right? And is there, we're talking about a model, unsustainable model, endless chain model. You're doomed by design, but it is cast as a business. So it is actually presented to you as an escape from risk. In other words, the rest of life is all risk.
The certainty narrative is very attractive, right?
Yes. So it's presented to you as the perfect plan. And it is called, the first MLM, they called, the company was called Neutralite. But that was about an innocuous vitamin pill. When you got into the business, they showed you, quote, the plan. That's all they called it. When Amway took over Neutralite, they did exactly the same thing. You would go to a meeting and you'd hear about the plan, right? And the plan was this airtight, perfect scheme. 5 get 25, 2 get 4, get 8, get 16, and there you are reaping the benefits, coming in the door. Risk, which you've been in your whole life and not doing that well, getting your ass beat, in business and sales and school teaching and working as a post office, as a fireman, or whatever it is, you're losing. This is where you become a winner. So it's arguing that now in a market economy, which as we know is all about risk, reward, failure, success, those are kind of the way market economies are defined. We truthfully, in a market economy, you don't think about sublime fulfillments. You don't think about, really, we don't have much word for that. We don't have great language for other ways to fulfill your life. I mean, we talk about it a little, but really, if you didn't make any money, you're a loser. I mean, I heard Donald Trump refer to a reporter as, you're a lightweight. You don't talk to me like that. You're a lightweight. So no matter, somebody could be a brilliant genius and so on, but if they drive up in an old Honda, we don't really respect them. I mean, that's kind of true. So you take that
collectively. That's the world in which we live, right? That we're always being sold new stuff. We've got to keep the economy going. Got to keep buying stuff.
Yeah, we're already prone to believe this anyway. So as I say, multi-level marketing didn't have to invent new language. It just borrowed the language and the myths we already have, and then grossly exaggerated and distorted them. Now, this is now spread. It spreads. I said it's like the ships with products going all over the world. They had rats in them in the hull. Well, the rats went wherever the products went, right? So, the diseases went with the sailors. Multi-level marketing rides with capitalism. So wherever capitalism goes, multi-level marketing goes. And it goes as a manifestation of capitalism, the highest manifestation. So you've got people in China who their first introduction to capitalism turned out to be working in sweatshops, right, making plastic junk and electronic products. But real capitalism is compound interest. It's Las Vegas, it's Disney World, right? It's Wall Street. It's Madison Avenue. That's real capitalism. That's the one people long for. And that's exactly what multi-level marketing claims to be. It's capitalism claims to be. Well, how do you know it is? Look, there's products, people buying and selling. Some of these companies even traded on New York Stock Exchange. Must be capitalism. Has to be. So, okay, capitalism, that's what we want. That's going to deliver us. And then it's capitalism, not just a job. It's you're an owner, a business owner. In an Amway and all these others, you're called an IBO, an independent business owner. Imagine you're a little, a farmer in a little village somewhere in Thailand. You suddenly become an independent business owner with a multinational company. You can see it has such gigantic appeal wherever it goes. It is selling capital. And let's face it, right now there isn't any competing. There's no competition to that capitalistic story. There's no communism out there. Socialism is not really much of a story. There isn't much out there, as I said, offering fulfillment, happiness, prosperity, only capitalism right now. And if Amway is allowed to present itself as the highest form of capitalism, then of course it's going to go everywhere. Now, we should add in, just as we told the story of how the reality, the truth of it, has become more, more people are aware and it's become more widely known now in the U.S. This will happen and is already happening in other countries. So, I'm getting complaints and inquiries from all over the world here, from Egypt, from South Africa, from Lithuania, everywhere. The same story. Hey, I joined Herbalife or this or that. I think this thing might be a scam, but what do you know? You're in America. Is it a scam? So just as there is a political side here, you have, and here we have a 44-member caucus in Congress, in the House of Representatives, 44 members, called the Direct Selling Caucus. And they have been organized and funded by the multi-level marketing industry to protect it from law enforcement, investigation, and so on. This same thing goes on every country. There's an element of influence buying that occurs everywhere. Thursday, I'm talking to a group of journalists from the British Virgin Islands, and they are in this quandary. They're having this suddenly pyramid schemes are everywhere. They're multi-level marketing schemes and these gifting schemes, both. And they go to the authorities, and the authorities incomprehensibly tell them they're not breaking any law. And so the journalists are saying, but how could that be? They're not breaking a law, but people are losing. They're being deceived, falsely promised, and the harm is terrible for our people. And you're saying there's no law being broken, and well, that's the influence buying. That no law is going to be written against it, and no law enforcement agency is going to tackle this because it's big, it's global. And if any one country, I went to a seminar in Bhutan, Sri Lanka, and there were people there, regulators from the central banks of 5 countries there. And they came up to me privately and they say, we'd love to ban this thing from our country, but we don't dare. They're supported by the World Trade Organization, by the U.S. Trade Delegation, the U.S. Department of Commerce, and there would be consequences to us for outlawing this here, and we're not going to do it. But we wish we could, and we wish we could inform more people about it, so at least, even though it can operate in our country, we could at least warn them about it. It's very hard to warn people about something that is presented as the greatest income opportunity in the world, and it's considered legal. If it's legal, then it must be true.
And in some of these countries, it's a lot easier to buy that influence, frankly. The institutions aren't as strong, all of that kind of stuff. That's right.
In my book, I think, the story of the influence buying, of why the government has not done anything. First, the history is the government did try. They did in the 60s and 70s, and it just got politically stopped. It's very hard for many people to grasp here in the U.S. because we just don't want to believe that it works that way. But it is just, I used the language from the book. I said the only way you can really understand this is you have to walk away from our sensibilities and briefly adopt the sensibilities of the early 1900s when we had a big reform movement, the so-called muckraking era of journalism and reform movements and for good government and so on. Back then, they called influence buying treasonous, and they called taking this graft and boodling, and they called it bribery, giving politicians money to promote a special interest over a public interest. They called that bribery. And we don't ever use terms like, we call it soft money, buying influence, lobbying, right? We don't even call them lobbyists now, they're consultants. And there's a revolving door. People from government move back and forth between being lobbyists to a government regulator and then back to being a lobbyist.
You also have people like Madeleine Albright, who was a spokesperson or ambassador or something for Herbalife. And what does that say? What does that say?
Yeah, according to news reports, she's gotten over $10 million to her company for being a, quote, ambassador for Herbalife. There are videos on the internet of her talking to the CEO of Herbalife and telling how wonderful Herbalife spreads democracy and nutrition and freedom. And she's not the first. I mentioned Alexander Haig, who was the Secretary of State for Ronald Reagan. He worked for Amway.
Both of the major parties in the U.S.
And it is definitely bipartisan. Absolutely. Madeleine Albright, of course, is a Democrat. But it doesn't matter. I mean, this thing is and it's gotten so big right now that there just aren't any people in Congress in either party that are even looking into it at this stage. That may change. But it's a bipartisan scam. It has bipartisan support, and the victims are powerless, unorganized, largely voiceless. I mean, there are people like me and others that are out there talking about it, but we don't have any influence, and we don't have any institutional. There's no, even the consumer protection groups aren't really addressing this. One reason
go ahead.
Yeah, I was saying one reason consumer protection groups, I think, ignore this partly is it doesn't have a good villain. Remember, these schemes couldn't really work if they didn't have thousands of minions. And so the perpetrators turn out to be us. It's not Dow Chemical. It's not some evil pharmaceutical company, Purdue Pharma or something, foisting a poison upon us, tricking us. Well, we bring it to our families. We spread it ourselves.
And it's very easy for some of these firms to turn on the PR taps and say, oh, these guys are trying to deprive these hardworking entrepreneurs who are mothers and people who are disadvantaged or whatever, making a wonderful living on their own, self-starters, etc., and they're trying to take that away. That's a very easy narrative for a PR firm to run with.
As long as nobody goes and says, well, how many people actually are making
exactly. Yeah.
Some data here to back it up. Yeah. Of course, they manufacture data, too. Okay. So you have to be prepared to, sort of combat that with real data. And there is a lot of data gathered now, but the data is, as I say, when something gains this much power, this much scale, global, 100 countries, this much political influence, this much authorization and endorsement from all sectors, able to hire the highest celebrities, and Oliver North would speak at the annual meetings, Newt Gingrich was there speaking, and so on. It is the big lie. So data against a big lie has a lot to overcome. Hard data against a big lie is hard to overcome. And so sometimes when we speak up and show the data, it is beyond most people's imagination. They're saying, that can't be true. Well, here's the data. In fact, these companies disclose the data. John Oliver, on his show, very popular show, he did a show at the end of 2016 on multi-level marketing. And in that brief 30-minute show, which is just brilliantly done, and covered the main basis that we're talking about here, he took the data directly from one of the largest of these companies, showing that 93% of all the people that join in any given year earned zero. Zero. So these are the people at the bottom, right? So zero. And he said, if you stayed home and, watched TV and, you would earn as much as 90% of these people. That number is very hard for most people to compute. It's like, that can't be. This company's huge. It's got millions of people in it. It's just treated with such great, in Utah where it's based, it has this gigantic headquarters. The Mormon church gets huge donations from it. That can't be what you just said. Well, there's the data. The data just bounce off because the big lie is so big, And that's what it's kind of up against. So there's a psychological factor at this point now that has to be chipped away.
You talked about the chipping away with some of these websites and Reddits and things like that. What are some of the other ways in which that can start to crumble, the power of these companies and of this illusion? How are some of the ways in which that can start to unravel a little bit? Are you hopeful that could happen?
Yeah, pop culture itself. When I first started writing about this, from the late 90s up into the 2000 till let's say 3 or 4 years ago, it was just a dead zone. I always used to say to my wife, who got probably very tired of hearing this, how is it that everywhere I look, I see multi-level marketing? Everybody had a story. I was involved in 33 court cases. I saw the devastation was unbelievable. Some people committed suicide over this. I constantly hearing stories of divorce. Everybody has an MLM story. I knew the numbers, that millions and millions of people were involved in these schemes. Why isn't it on TV? Why isn't it in sitcom? Why isn't Jerry Seinfeld talking about it? Why aren't the Seinfeld guys, characters talking about it? Why isn't it on the nightly news somewhere? Why isn't there a play about it? Why isn't there a song about it? It was just under the table somehow. But that's changed. That has changed. And I think that is probably doing as much as far more than anything I could do, far more than my book could do, is when it is ridiculed. And it is being, John Oliver, I think, broke the ice. And that was November 2016. That his video that's on YouTube for that show, John Oliver, multi-level marketing, is Google it. Almost 30 million people have seen that. And it is devastating takedown, a debunking of the whole scheme and of some of he names the names, and it's all of them. The show that's very popular is a Canadian sitcom called Schitt's Creek,
yes.
SCHIT.
Yes. Yeah.
They have a segment in there where they take, Penn and Teller did a piece on multi-level marketing. Showtime had a whole series called On Becoming a God in Central Florida. Kirsten Dunst starred in this. And finally, it was brought in as the backdrop. The people in there whose whole lives were turned upside down and driven by this. It's a parody of Amway, really. It's pretty obvious what it is in that show. So it's happening. It's showing up. I did an interview with Jim Jeffries, the stand-up Australian comedian. He did one on pyramid schemes. It's on YouTube. Jim Jeffries is very popular. And so, and when they said to him that show is called I Don't Know About That, and they bring up a subject to him and he tries to kind of wing what he knows about it, and then they have an expert come on to talk about it and so on. But when they said to him, the subject is going to be pyramid schemes, he first word out of his mouth was, like Amway? Like Amway? And then they said, well, we're not saying Amway's a pyramid scheme. But you see the connection already was there. So I think before the regulators move, if they ever move, it will be it'll be civic action by people on the street, and as it is happening mostly in cyber world. And it will be in pop culture, where it is through derision, ridicule. The truth will be told in a jest by the jesters, but still being told. And at that point, I think the spell really can't,
right.
When it's ridicule, it doesn't work anymore.
Right. Do you think that historically women have been targeted more than men? And been more victims than men, or is that?
No, that's true. That's verifiable. It's the great majority actually of people involved are women. Not originally, because originally it was modeled on the door-to-door salesperson, who originally was a man. The door-to-door sales man. Later, Fuller Brush was a Fuller Brush man. Encyclopedia salesmen started out men. So, but that began to break down. But later, the products themselves for MLM became much more with Mary Kay, Avon. Avon didn't start out as multi-level marketing, but it is now. Avon, Mary Kay, and others. These products lend themselves more to women selling to women. But there are other factors too. The need for, quote, extra income. Not that MLM delivers it, but it promises it, is more resonant for women, actually. They are the ones who ultimately, especially single mothers, and every spouse could become a single mother, right? So, and many mothers are single mothers, and so on. So, and so-called extra income in the family. falls often to the female spouse to produce. The male, he's got his job, his sales, his income is probably declining if it's following the trend of the American middle class, or maybe he's had spells of unemployment. It turns out to be up to the female in the household to make that up. So between products and the economic drive, and of course MLM has played upon this, referring to MLM as feminism, as somehow a feminist. Yes.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's amazing. There's, I wouldn't use the word genius of some of these schemes, but how they're clever. They're very clever. And so you can kind of see how they keep people. They're very manipulative, obviously, but they are clever. So that's an interesting feminism through. Wow.
And
wow.
You're saying about how will it break through? One other thing that always mystified me, I said I wrote a book, the first book, which was in 1997. But the book at the time, again, based on what I knew at the time, what I understood, what really drove me was the values that were captured and by the pyramid scheme, how they can take seemingly good values, altruism, a sense of community, wanting to spread abundance to a larger base of people, and so on, a service, wanting to have a meaningful life, make a contribution, how they could turn these things into, twist them, and how relationships were being commercialized. Those were kind of the drivers. So I spent a lot of time in that book talking about that. And frankly, I did not have the full grasp of the nature of the beast as I do today. Now, that was 20 years ago, and I thought, well, I've written one. There'll be many more. There has not been one other critical book written in the United States. One journalist in India wrote a book called Marauders of Hope that just came out this year, 2020. But it's very India-centric. But here in the U.S., where all this thing began, nobody's written. There's not been a documentary on this. So I'm hoping that this time, my book, Ponzinomics, will be a harbinger of more to come. There's certainly more in the media, news media now than there used to be. There, as I mentioned, there's more in pop culture. There's been one pretty good documentary that at least dealt with it. That was Betting on Zero, that Ted Braun, the California professor, who did that one about the whole Herbalife episode of the short sell that William Ackman attempted. That's a breakthrough. So I think, and I'm part of a little network of people that are planning a conference to deal with MLM reality that hopefully will get exposure and spread to a lot of people. So it's coming. I think it's coming, but I'm hoping that Ponzinomics is this time part of something that's going to carry forward with more people writing seriously. Academia has been largely absent. It's not really studied in schools. I have been in touch with a small network of academics who are independently, and they're fearful. They're afraid to go there because of repercussions of looking too deeply into this. Their institutions don't really support them for it. And even the first question you asked early on, how could this be legal? Most of it hinges on that one case in 1979 that broke precedent. It overrode the FTC attorneys. It was ruled on not by a federal judge, but by an administrative law judge, which is much lower standard. It's not part of the judiciary. It's part of the executive branch. They mostly hear Social Security and disability claims and things. But the FTC used to use them to hear cases. The FTC was not bound by that decision. It did not have to. It bore nothing legally on future actions. but it was elevated to something almost biblical, something scriptural, like it was the final word. That was a political promotion, that to call this something final. And it has been cited forever and never reviewed. And so, we have hopes that some legal scholars will finally go back and say, how in the world could an endless chain scheme be legalized? How could it be? On its face, it used to be called per se, inherently deceptive. How did that change? So, I do think that there's a breakthrough coming, but timing, who knows?
I am conscious of time here, but I did want to, before we go, well, first of all, I did want you to talk a little bit more about how people can get Ponzinomics and all the rest of it. But even before that, I was just wondering if you had any thoughts about, for my listeners who might either be considering getting involved in an MLM, or maybe they are, or maybe they have a loved one or friend who's embedded in one of these things. Any thoughts on how they ought to approach that? That would be useful.
Yes, and it's a huge question. How you've got somebody in your family, they're even called, people call them bots, because they're talking weird now. They're relentlessly recruiting everybody in the family, which is annoying but also disturbing. And they may be engaging in some very financially destructive behavior for themselves, running up credit cards, not working, not going to school, things like that. And how do you get them out? And you mentioned Steve Hassan before. Of course, getting anyone out of a mind-controlling cultic, whatever you want to call it, scheme, group that's organized with a leader and a belief system is not going to be easy. And they will resist you. Of course, as you pointed out, they have been told that if somebody's criticizing it, you already know, don't talk to them. Don't listen because they're criticizing. And they bought that. So one thing I guess the advice I've found to give people is, and this is common in trying to get people out of cults, remind people that the person questioning it cares for them. It's not some guy at a bar on a street corner. The people that are talking to them and warning them care about them. You try to remind them to get back in touch with the identity which is being eroded or stolen from them, their earlier hopes and dreams, which have parlayed. I had a young man that I've been in touch with recently. He spent almost 13 years, and he's finally gotten out of MLM. And he said, they kind of took my youth. I had many dreams and hopes, and I'm now getting back to them. I'm just trying to, and of course he had tremendous regret, fell into a certain despair and depression from it, but he's pulling out of it. But part of it was remembering what he used to want for his life, which he had not been getting. Confrontation does not work. Telling somebody they're stupid, look at the facts, is the opposite that works, that drives them away. Time is on your side because most people don't last very long in this. Facts do matter, and presenting real facts can be useful, but expect that they'll probably be rejected, at least initially. So these are the kinds of things. I know that doesn't add up to any kind of formula, because there isn't one that I've seen. And you obviously, with thousands and thousands of people involved, you can't exactly go hire a professional. And I don't do that. I don't go help people individually. But even if there were such a thing as an exit counselor from MLM, there wouldn't be enough of them to make any difference, because we're talking about something on a very large scale. So yeah, it's quite a problem. I mean, you'll see people rejecting facts. They show a kind of odd, unhealthy willingness to do whatever the leader tells them. They'll defy common sense. They'll reject facts, and so on. That is the classic behavior of somebody who's lost their critical thinking powers. and they've sort of been pulled under the spell of something. So that's a part of a recognition too, that this is something quite powerful. This isn't something trivial. These organizations are quite sophisticated. They've had 40, 50 years to hone this down very well, and they have a lot of power behind them. I mean, if you want to be devious, if you want to control people, and there's no consequences from the government or law enforcement, then your devious powers can be quite escalated.
Well, that's all very useful stuff, nonetheless, because as we discussed at the outset, there's more and more of this activity. Even though there's a sort of countervailing trend, there are many people who are going to be very attracted to some of these opportunities, or these opportunities in quotes, given current circumstances economically.
Yes.
So just before we go, could you just maybe share a bit more about the book, where people can find it, how people can follow you, all of that good stuff?
Yeah, the book is available on Amazon.com. That's where to get the book. And it's available as a Kindle or paperback. So it's a trade paperback size. I hope to get an audio version too, but that hasn't been developed yet, but will soon. But right now it's a Kindle and paperback, and it's December 15th is the publication date. And the book is quite readable. It's not written in academic, although it's heavily documented. It's got over 300 endnotes at the end, but you don't have to read them to go through the whole thing. And I've spent about over 3 years writing it. So, and it takes MLM from the beginning. Where did it all come from? That was my first, where I thought you can't understand this thing until you go back and see its banal beginnings. How it got started. Two guys, one a cemetery plot salesman and the other a pop psychologist, both of them sort of failing in life, and they hooked up with a failing vitamin company and concocted this, what they called the plan. The plan being a sort of mixture of the chain letter mania that had spread around the U.S. just a few years before, and the Ponzi scheme that had run about 20 years before. And then match that up with some of the worst elements of direct selling, door-to-door selling, which you already know about that, of how the door-to-door sales grunt. It can be heavily manipulated and free labor can be pulled out of them. So that went into the mix too. And then it kind of goes forward into how it spread and how it escaped law enforcement and how it built up a formidable propaganda machine. Because we are talking about how do you convince people to invest in something they're going to lose their money in, and how do you convince somebody that you have a viable business based on an unsustainable chain letter? How do you do that? Well, you do it with propaganda and some fairly sophisticated mind control techniques. The politics of it are covered heavily with naming names. It, as you said, bipartisan. The revolving door, naming names, how they built that up, that have protected it from investigations and law enforcement. And then finally into how they imposed the belief system on people, because it's just not enough to flim-flam somebody financially. That works one time, but we're talking about a scheme that may captivate people for 10 years or more, and millions of people. And still getting away with it year after year after year. How do you do that? Well, that's by developing, and Ponzinomics is a made-up word, of course, combining Ponzi with economics, and it's defined as a delusional belief system in which the pyramid scheme, the unsustainable pyramid scheme, is presented and accepted as a viable business model, capable of delivering for people a fulfilling life plus unlimited profit. So it's a delusional. Ponzinomics is a belief system. That's what I named it. And when you encounter it, somebody is in the grip of a belief system, but what do you call it? And some people will say, magical thinking, prosperity gospel, MLM. Well, it's all that. And that's what the term means that I coined. So the book is comprehensive in this way, that it's the thread of it is that MLM is not just a scheme, scam. It's not just a business problem, or it's not just something that is a kind of folly. It is a delusional popular belief system.
Well, sounds brilliant. Sounds like a great book, and congratulations on contributing to this genre that we need to have. We need to have more authors like you explaining to people how this all works. So, and thank you very much for joining me. This was great. We covered so much ground. I really love this conversation.
Well, thanks for your interest in it too, Ben, and I appreciate the questions and thoughtfulness that you put into this.
No, thank you, Robert. All the best.
Okay, you too. Bye-bye now.
All right, I hope you found that useful and enjoyable. Please check out Ponzinomics on Amazon. Check out the resources on pyramidschemesalert.org. And if someone you know is caught up in one of these things, and again, they are rising in popularity during this time of pandemic, whether they're called multi-level marketing schemes or gifting schemes, check out those resources. Links are in the show notes. We have more episodes coming up. If you've not yet done so, please subscribe, share, or give us a positive rating or review wherever you get your podcasts. We will be back soon. Until then, you know the drill. Risk is life.